All right, good morning. Welcome to our talk today. Me and Derek, we had a long discussion about the little guy is supposed to hold it here, and the loud guy is supposed to hold it down here. So give me a heads up if you can't hear us. You can hear us. Let us know. It'd be fantastic. My name is Tim Medin. We'll give you a quick, very brief intro. I teach with SANS. I'm faculty. I'm the program director for the SANS MSISE Program. Been doing pen testing for well over a decade now. Now I have a consulting company, Red Siege. Derek?
I'm going to have to learn to introduce myself first because I don't do any of that. I'm a pen tester at Black Hills Information Security, and thank you guys for coming to our conference. How many of you are here for the first time, first Wild West Hackfest? Sweet, nice. Well, we only have one other one, so next year I expect to see some repeat folks. But yeah, like I said, I'm a pen tester, security analyst at Black Hills, and that's my dream job.
Cool. So we have first timers, second timers, third. Okay. Great jokes. I'm here all week. Try the veal. Tip your waiter. Thank you so much for attending our session today. So what we wanted to do is talk through some of the sort of the dumb hacks that we've been seeing, because what we see isn't the super advanced stuff in your pen test, right? How many of you are pen testers, red teamers, want to be either of those things? Great, 6, 7 people, fantastic, great crowd. But what we're going to do is we're going to discuss. Hold on, my clicker's not working. Oh, now it's trying to install updates. That's going to be a great idea. Score. Yeah, so what we see from time and time again is we see the simple stuff works. And I would encourage you, when you're doing some of your pen testing, sorry, I'm a wanderer. When you're doing some of your pen testing, you're doing some of your attacks, and honestly, the defenses as well. So many times, the lazy stuff, the simple stuff, is going to be what gets you the most traction. So be lazy. Try the simple stuff first. You don't have to necessarily hack way up here. We're going to show you sort of a number of scenarios, and then we'll come back and sort of wrap it up at the end. Now, whenever you see a breach, there's always a 3-letter group who does the hack, right? It's APT. What does the A stand for in APT? Advanced. The P stands for, I've always wanted to do that. And the T is, of course, threat. Right? From time and time again, and every single breach, it's the APT. But if you've ever paid attention to a lot of the hacks, the A isn't necessarily a thing. The P is barely there, and of course, they might be a little bit of a threat. The key scenario here, Equifax. Now, they were breached, the vulnerability was released in March. They were breached in May. That is 2 months with off-the-shelf exploit code. Off the shelf after 2 months. Is that very A? Right? I mean, it's off the shelf. It's like, oh, I'm super advanced. You know what I did? I Googled for the exploit. Right? And 2 months, is that very persistent? Like, how much vacation time do we get here in the US? A couple of weeks? Like, 2 months? That's absolutely a crazy town. And we see this time and time again, where these off-the-shelf vulnerabilities that have been sitting around for a long time are what ultimately is going to end up leading to the breach, or leading to us get the compromise in our pen test or our red team. Derek's going to talk you through now a real sort of simple way to do phishing.
So what's one of the first things you need if you want to send a phishing campaign to a target? Email, a domain, right? So you need a domain because you have to communicate on the internet, right? So how many people run some kind of email gateway or mail filter? I expect everyone to raise their hands, right? Because even if you're using cloud email providers, they're trying to prevent spam and malicious domains. And they do that through what? Categorization, reputation, right? So it turns out it's actually really easy to get past categorization and reputation type stuff. What you do is you go to a website and find a previously expired domain, and that's already categorized. And then you use that. That's not very sophisticated. Expireddomains.net doesn't take a lot of skill to go create an account and use that, right? So, I mean, you could create a domain, right, and be like, you know, q9x37.com and try and get that categorized. Or you can actually search for your term and say, I'd like a domain with some kind of message in there. And just pick one. And then pretty much you've bypassed those categorizations. This also works for command and control traffic. I mean, how many people use something like a blue coat that you block on categorization, right? Yeah, just pretty much out of the gate on pen tests now, I don't create domains. I just go find one that somebody else created and they forgot about it and it was already categorized. And then that works. This is super advanced stuff.
Just take a quick step back to add more to that. Now, the reason why the messages thing is great, now, you know, you're using expired domains. It's kind of cool because it's sort of like a zombie website. Someone's hopes and dreams on building this giant business has now died, and we're resurrecting that to eat the brains of other end users. Yeah, and the great reason, I just thought of that, yeah. The great reason why messages are so fantastic, or message somewhere in the title, is attachments. Now, we tell end users time and time again, don't click on blank in email. Fill in that blank. Links, attachments, anything. A couple people look confused, like, I click on everything. It's fantastic. Yeah, we tell people time and time again, don't click on things in email. We also tell our end users, if you have something sensitive to send, use secure email. How many of you have used any sort of secure email ever? I expect to see a lot more hands, but okay. What is in 100% of those secure emails? Links or attachments. So we tell our end users, okay, folks, don't click on anything in email unless it looks really important. And the end users are like, got it. I'm just going to click on everything to make it easy, right? And this is why it ends up being so super effective. Another very sort of a simple approach, actually Derek and I were working on this together. We had an Excel macro in trying to embed a Cobalt Strike agent into the Excel macro. We pasted it into the Excel macro and attempted to save it to disk, and Defender's like, nope, not going to let you do it. A little warning popped up. It's like, this is clearly a bad Excel document. So I'm like, oh, well, time to start reversing Windows Defender, which sucks. And we're trying to play like the high-low game, like, you know, is it the top half of this macro causing the problem? Is it the bottom half of the macro? And then I'm like, you know what? Let's go back to the basic tenet of this talk. Let's be lazy. So instead, copy and pasted the entire macro, pasted it into cell A12, and turned the font white. And then when the Excel document opened, we said, hey, just run whatever is in A12. Now, I've had people after the talk, they're like, how did you know to use A12? Did you reverse engineer it? I'm like, I so badly want to say yes, but it was like, it was closest to my mouse. So I just ended up pasting it there, right? So we paste it there, you turn the font white so the end user can't see it, save it, and Defender's like, oh, fair enough, looks good, carry on. And that worked for a number of months. So again, try the simple stuff because that's often going to be the best bypass.
So I'm going to ask another question. How many of you use some kind of EDR solution, some kind of next generation APT prevention blinky box? Yeah, it's the latest, greatest type thing. I'm not saying they don't do something good, but there's still quite a few issues. So the next slide is the super advanced way that I got past one of these, next generation APT blinky boxes. Does anybody want to guess what I did before? I used NCAT. Like on the machine that I was on, I wanted to reverse shell from it. I went to the Nmap website, downloaded the binary off their website, and shoveled a reverse shell. And it worked. The EDR solution thought that was great. How many of you think that that's a good idea? Like maybe they should have found that? I do. I don't think a netcat reverse shell is something that next generation AI shouldn't find. Oh.
They say I'm too loud. I have to hold it down lower. My bad. So John has to come and be my handler. Thank you, John. Yeah, John's the sound man. So Spectre and Meltdown. You guys, how many of you have heard of Spectre and Meltdown? Keep your hands up if you totally understand it. All right, like 1 or 2 hands, fantastic. So Spectre and Meltdown were an attack against the processor and their branch prediction. Really awesome stuff. Like it would execute multiple paths at the same time, and then when it figured out which branch it actually needed to take, it would like go back and collapse multiple universes together. There's like wormholes involved and dead kittens and like the souls of virgins. Like weird stuff happened inside the processor. So anyways, when this vulnerability came out, I had clients come to me and they're like, Tim, what should we do about Spectre and Meltdown? And this was like the next day. I'm like, what should we do? And I'm like, you should change your password policy. And they're looking at me, they're like, Tim, do you understand Spectre and Meltdown? I'm like, not really. I mean, I do. I understand how it actually works and the practical implications of it. But the bad passwords, and they're like, we went back and forth a few times. I'm like, look, you're focusing on the wrong risk, right? Now, how many of you have ever worked the help desk after a holiday? Yeah, he's just like, yeah, I did. What was the phone call that you get like 100% of the time on January 2nd? What's my password? Can I change my password, right? And how often are you supposed to change your passwords? Every 90 days. Why? When Moses came down from the mountain, he had a third tablet. And on that right? Clearly not the case, right? Actually, if you look really closely at the moon, the ancient aliens carved into it, change your passwords every night. No, the reason is because in the 70s, yes, the 70s. Now, I'm going to ask this question, I'm going to feel old. How many of you never saw the 1970s that are still in this room? Oh, gosh. Does your mom drive you here? How did you? Yeah, so in the 70s, it took 90 days to crack a password. These days, we have password cracking rigs that can get trillions with the T password attempts per second. We have pass the hash. We have mimikatz. We have social engineering. We have breached passwords and password reuse. And this 90-day thing, of course, ends up working against us. Now, if you've ever done any sort of pen testing, we as the attackers know the password that will work this month. Because the end users, they get tired of calling the help desk on January 2nd. And they feel bad, and they look out the window, and they're like, man, if only I could look out the window and realize what my password is. And there's like snow on the ground. And then 90 days later, when they call the help desk again, there's flowers. And 90 days later, it's in Texas, so people are like dying in the streets. So people use that season and year. So we had a situation where literally this gets us in with single factor on the VPN. So this Spectre and Meltdown, this is not the biggest threat. It's important, but you have to properly prioritize. Don't go spending all of your resources trying to fix this when you can get in from the external on a single factor VPN using fall 2017. This was me and Derek. We were doing some work together. We got absolutely destroyed. And I'm like, after that week, I was like, does anybody need a sales engineer because I'm in the wrong line of work? So Derek texts me, he's like, yeah, I totally got in with fall 2017. I'm like, cool, can we in a presentation? He's like, happily, LOL, right? Cool. Oops.
So playing off the bad password thing, there's a number of ways that you can take advantage of bad passwords to get into an organization. So how many of you are still using an Office web app server publicly on the internet? It's okay, you don't have to raise your hands. But if you do, I thank you, because you've made my job a whole lot easier. So I have a coworker who wrote a tool that you can essentially point and click at the OWA server, and take this tool called Mail Sniper and take advantage of bad passwords. Now, you might be thinking, wow, just using someone else's tool and pointing and clicking at infrastructure, that's not what hackers do. That's what script kiddies do. Yeah, I mean, I think that you should take the time to understand what the code is doing, but a lot of the heavy lifting is already done in a lot of cases for you to take advantage of these kinds of misconfigurations. And we still see all the time on penetration tests someone using really bad passwords. In fact, when I get into an organization and I see that there's like a 14-character password policy, there's a little part of me inside that starts crying because I know that it's going to be a lot harder. But the point of this is that if there are tools already out there, and this is just one example. There's another one by TrustWave called, I think, Password Spray or something like that, where you can just point the tool and click. And you can even do this as a defender to see if you have users who are choosing bad passwords. Oh yeah, this one's kind of fun.
All right, so going back to that sort of a simple sort of a hacking thing, well, I guess not really going back, staying with the theme of the entire talk. So I had a situation. A friend of mine in 2012, January 2012, this actually happened the previous month, but he wrote a blog post, went to Amazon, bought a webcam, and did some reverse engineering of the firmware. How many of you have ever done reverse engineering to firmware? It's actually surprisingly simple with tools like binwalk. Now in 2012, binwalk was not quite as full-featured. What binwalk does is we give it an arbitrary blob, and it will look inside of that file for headers. And in this case, with the firmware, what binwalk did is it found 3 different headers. And what we had to do then, what he did, is we had to chop it up to get those 3 portions of the file. Now, the new versions of binwalk will actually do all of the extraction for you. Really, really, really simple. But back then, we had to chop it up. So he chops up this firmware into 3 pieces and looks at the 3rd piece. In the 3rd piece, he sees what looks like a Linux file system. In there's a directory called server. Looks inside a server, there's another directory called CGI bin. Inside of CGI bin is another directory called Anani. Guess what Anani stands for? Anonymous, right? So it's anonymous access. So then what he does is he grabs his browser, browses to his webcam, /CGI bin, /Anani, /mjpeg, that's CGI, and he has authorization bypass. Okay, so he's got full access to the camera. This is, whoops, there's bad words, and I should have edited this differently. This is straight from his blog post. It's for science. So really simple. So I'm like, you know what? If this dude can do that, so can I. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to click, like literally hack by numbers. So I go to Amazon, spend $45 on another web camera. Use binwalk to do the same types of extraction, different piece of hardware, very similar type process. Again, find a Linux file system. Now, in a Linux file system, where's one of the first places we should look? Yeah, etc password, right? Now, one of the really cool things with these sort of older devices, it's like going back in time and hacking. All of the nice defenses that we have, all gone. So typically, in your typical Linux system, etc password has your user account information. And the passwords are in like etc shadow. Not with this. This old school new device, the credentials are in etc password. But unfortunately, they're encrypted using this really high-tech encryption called base64. Yeah, so base64 is an encoding mechanism. So you can reverse that encoding and get the clear text credentials. I'm like, oh, this is cool. So I look in the web interface, and I look in etc password. I look in etc password, the first user is admin. In the web interface, also a user admin. In etc password, viewer. In the admin interface, viewer. In etc password, factory test. Factory test is not in the admin interface on the website. I'm like, huh, well, this is interesting. So I log into the device. and may or may not have logged into a bunch of devices in non-extradition countries. Just a joke. But now we have authentication bypass with a backdoor account. Super simple. Literally, followed the directions of somebody else, found this vulnerability, ended up contacting the manufacturer. Now, this was before the days of bug bounties, so you couldn't be like, hey, pay me or else. Because back in those days, we had a technical term for that. It's called extortion. So we had to like, do you compensate for exclusive disclosure of security vulnerabilities in your product that may have impacted your brand and reputation, blah, 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 blah. And they ended up paying me like $3,000 or $4,000 for about 1 minute and 27 seconds worth of work. I will never make that much money that quickly again. I was hoping last week for $1.6 billion, didn't work out. But literally, it was following the steps of somebody else. You don't have to necessarily go out and try to create the brand newest thing. Try things that other people have used. It is incredibly, incredibly effective. One of my other sort of favorite bugs is this Cisco flaw. This Cisco flaw is probably about 8 years older by now. So with this Cisco flaw, you could log into a Cisco device. You could give it an SSH private key. Literally any SSH private key. In fact, all you had to have is a file that said it was a key. It's like the Cisco device would be like, hey, you got a private key, bro? I do. You want to see it? No, you're fair enough. You got it. And I was thinking, I'm like, we ended up talking to the guy who found the vulnerability. I'm like, how did you find this? Like, how did you virtualize the Cisco device and hook up GDB and reverse engineer this? And he's like, don't tell anybody. But what I did is he accidentally overwrote his private key with his public key, and he was still able to log into a bunch of the Cisco devices. So that was his high-tech sort of mechanism for finding that. And you would think issues like that wouldn't happen.
So you would think that that doesn't happen anymore, right? So how many of you have appliances in your network? Like some kind of appliance that you're right. And what does that appliance generally use underneath the hood in terms of an operating system? Linux, yeah, right. So about 2 weeks ago, I saw this vulnerability come through a Twitter feed and thought, man, this is really great for our talk, right? So it turns out, now this isn't open SSH, this is lib SSH, right? So you have to use this in terms of making your own implementation of SSH on your appliance. And so essentially the way it works is you send, if you try and authenticate with SSH, you send an authentication request to the server and it sends back success, right? Well, it turns out if you just send a success message out of the gate, it just lets you in. So and this was 2 weeks ago. It's CVE 2018-10-933? Yeah. So this is still happening, and I think I saw that on Shodan there were about 3,500 devices facing the internet that this affected.
Another one of my sort of favorite bugs here. How many of you have children? How many of you have children that like ice cream? I see more hands than the first time. Like, oh, I don't have any kids, but yet they all like ice cream. That was weird. Anyway, so I call this, can I have some ice cream, Dad? So this vulnerability, if you ask the SQL server enough times, it's like, oh, fair enough, you're in. It's like, your kid comes and asks you, it's like, Dad, can I have some ice cream? Not till after dinner. Dad, can I have some ice cream? No. Dad, can I have some ice cream? No. Dad, can I have some ice cream? No. Can I have some ice cream? Go ask your mother. And then I get about 37 seconds of reprieve. Mom said, ask you again. And you're like, fine, go have the bloody ice cream. That's this vulnerability. Like, hey, can I authenticate? No, bad credentials, bad credentials, bad credentials, bad credentials. Fine already, just have it. Also call it the soccer trophy vulnerability. You tried real hard. You should be allowed in. I don't want to hurt your feelings. If I don't let you in, your self-esteem is going to be squashed. So here's access to the database server. The vulnerability was 1 in 256 tries, it would just randomly let you in. Now, the story I heard behind how this was found is somebody was using a vulnerability scanner. The vulnerability scanner said there's a default credential for this MySQL server. A default credential allows us access. So the gentleman went back to verify, does this default credential actually let me in? And he tries it, and it fails. He tries it again, and it fails. And again, and he fails. And then he writes a script to try over and over again. He like literally rage script this thing. And it's like, no, yes. He's like, whoa, what the hell just happened? And then found this sort of like lame-o type of vulnerability. So sort of wrapping this up, you never know too much, right? Like none of these concepts, none of these techniques, none of these vulnerabilities are that complex. But we see these vulnerabilities time and time again, and they're allowing us into the organization. We're the good guys. But it's also allowing the bad guys into the organization. And when you're trying to identify these vulnerabilities, when you're trying to do your hacks or your defenses, try some of the simple things first. Sort of related to that, ask some of the new people around you. Now, I'm sort of I consider myself senior, right? Like I have my own company. But it's kind of hard sometimes to go and ask a newer person, like, what are your thoughts on this? Right? You have to sort of lay yourself out there. And don't go with like, well, here's what I know how to do, blah, 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 and qualify it and then ask the question because you're already setting them up for failure. Just come at them humbly. It's like, I got nothing. What you got? And it gives them an opportunity to share with you. And they're going to come back with some brand new type ideas. Like literally that last one with the libSSH. I might have been stuck on that. Ask like a new person. It's like, well, did you try it 1,000 times? No, but maybe we should, right? So use those new people around you. Ask them. There's only so many times that new person is going to come to you and ask you for help. If every single time they ask for help, you squash them. And you tell them, it's like, well, here's a better way to do that. It gets tiring. We've probably all been there, right? Anybody ever been in that situation where you're the junior guy and you are excited? We keep talking how we want passionate people in the industry. But time and time again, we like to squash those people. So talk to the new people. Get an outside perspective. It's super valuable to get the input from somebody else because they're going to have a different viewpoint on some of that. So learn from some of the noobs. Now, one of the pen testing courses that I teach with SANS has this challenge. This challenge is literally my favorite CTF challenge of all time. Now let's take a step back. Let's sort of think of this like a noob. What types of characters do we see here? What types of characters? I hear uppercase. What else we got? Lowercase, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and an equal sign. Now there's probably some of you that sort of went to the next level and said base 64. Take the baby steps. It'll only take you a couple extra seconds. But it's happened to me a number of times where I'm like, I'm so smart, I'm going to jump up here, and I missed that baby step. Base 64 and base 32 look very similar. Now this happens to be base 64, but take that baby step. So what we can do to sort of decode this is we can use my favorite decoder, Burp. So I've got Burp here, right? And we got my base 64. And I can simply just say decode as base 64. Now we see these other characters, right? And this next set of characters, what types of characters do we see? Alphanumeric. What about more specifically? Hex, right? We got 0 through 9, A through F, right? So we got the hex. So again, once again, we can do the decoding. Now we end up with this. And this is the point where I giggle. I sit in front of the classroom and I sort of laugh because I can see this moment coming. And you'll have this table of like, there's 5 people on the team and 4 of them are super smart and 1 of them's relatively new. And the 4 people are like all gather around and they stand around on computers. And if you watch it, there's a lot of pointing, like, and then rubbing the head and thinking and wandering around. And there's one person by themselves and they're stuck. Now this is the third question in level 1 on a day 6 series of challenges. Level 1, third question, supposed to be really easy. And we see these advanced people, they look off to the right and they're like, oh, you know what this is? This is shellcode. And they start reverse engineering it. So they open up IDA. It's like, oh, it doesn't work in IDA. Let's try Hopper. Let's try Radare. Oh, wait, maybe it's ARM. Maybe it's MIPS. Maybe it's encrypted shellcode. And they do all this sort of like craziness. And you can see them like working like crazy. Again, level 1. And then you see the person kind of off by themselves. And all of a sudden, they put their hands in the air and they call everybody else over. And the new person has the answer. And what happened is all the advanced people see this and they forget where they came from. They go to that next level. They go to the shell code. They go to like sort of weird kind of encryption and doing some additional reverse engineering. And instead, what the new person did is, well, you know what? Burp worked the first 2 times. Let's try it again. And they literally just keep on clicking. And when you get to the last one, it's like, oh, look, hey, more hex. Right? And we do the additional sort of decoding here of ASCII hex. And then we end up with a Rickroll. But yeah, this is a sort of a fun challenge, but it sort of reinforces that point of try some of the simple stuff. Now, this is an example for a CTF, but I've seen this same sort of encryption with a web app and a mobile application, where they encrypted the data by encoding it multiple times in different ways. And literally just walking through this very simple thing ultimately led to the compromise of that app. So sort of related to that, go out and teach others, right? Like our presentation, well, as we like to think we're awesome, it was pretty simple, right? The hacks that you saw were pretty straightforward. Come back next year and you do your presentation. Do a presentation at your local event. Because I can guarantee you have some sort of knowledge that we don't have. And the vast majority of the people in the room have. And probably you even have some knowledge that nobody in the room has. You could come back and explain your perspective on something new. My favorite is Mike last year at DerbyCon did an exploitation 101. These are techniques that have been around for decades, plural. But he came back and did this packed house, here's how we do some exploitation. And people ended up coming up to Mike afterwards and say, thank you for doing that presentation. They kind of whispered because they were sort of ashamed to not know and ashamed to not ask. So allow people to ask you and be willing to share some of that knowledge. And it could literally be an existing technique, an existing way, but put your spin on it and tell your story. Now, to be honest, your first presentation is probably going to suck. Right? Nobody their first time when they were learning how to walk, like jumped up when they're 1 year old. You're like, I got this, bro. You want to race? There was a lot of falling on your face. My first talk was supposed to be 60 minutes. I finished it in 13.5 minutes. I had diarrhea of the mouth and I couldn't stop. I kept going faster and faster. My brain is like, you're going way too fast. You know how we should fix it? Go even faster. And it was horrific. And the first time, it's probably going to be bad. But that second time, you're like, you know what? I kind of got this. I feel a bit more comfortable. And that third time is going to be easier, and that fourth time, and that fifth time, it's going to get easier and easier. And if you really have a terrifying fear of being up in front, I mean, first off, you can think of what we did, and you're like, you can totally do better than we did. But you could also write blog posts. Share some of that knowledge. Again, you don't have to impress the wizards. Do something and show, put your spin on it. Show some of your perspective. Come back and share with the community. We all come here. We like to share cool ideas and some of those concepts. We have a really cool group in Dallas. Austin has a similar group where you're supposed to come to the group and you're supposed to talk if you come. Austin forces you. You have to give a 5-minute talk to even show up. And it can be whatever the heck you want. Super simple, and oftentimes it is. But I would encourage you, share, even if it is relatively simple. Comment?
And if you live in an area where you don't have a group already established, start one. That's what I did in my area. Is there anyone here from Virginia? Oh, wait. Yeah, I know him. So I started a meetup in the Tidewater area because there wasn't one, and now it's on its like third year, and I think we have like 300 members, and basically we just go to a bar and have a couple of beers and talk about InfoSec. It's completely open. You can not be in InfoSec. You can just come and hang out, and it's really welcoming environment. It's a CitySec style meetup. You can go find them on Reddit. And so just start one. You'd be surprised how many people in your community would love to come and do that.
All right, so we're getting ready to wrap up here. Really quick, I just want to add one more quick thing. I've got some shirts that I want to give out if you guys want some shirts. They say make dir hacky hack hack. And if you're not familiar with the story, there was a 16-year-old kid in Australia, in Melbourne, ended up hacking Apple, and they came and they searched his computer, and on his desktop was a directory called hacky hack hack, and it had all of the Apple stuff. So if you want a shirt, make dir hacky hack hack, I'll have some of those up front. My only request is, I got some paper, add you to a mailing list. Not going to spam you, but we'll tell you, hey, we got any sort of upcoming webcasts. Not going to try to sell you anything. It's, hey, you want to get some free content? We'd be more than happy to give it to you. Okay? And again, no marketing crap because I don't have the time for that. So we have a QR code on your iOS phone. For some reason, it only shows my Twitter address. If you're on Android, it shows both. redsiege.com/Dumberly is the slides, and here's our contact information. Thank you so much for attending, and hopefully we'll see you around the conference, and we got some shirts up front.